Leagues Cup 2024 is here, and MLS teams are taking a break from their season with about 10 games left for the most of them. They're taking a month-long hiatus to play in this tournament once again. It's going to be pitting MLS sides against all the Liga MX sides in Mexico. We're going to have 45 total teams in this tournament, all 29 MLS teams, and then 18 teams on the Mexican side. So you would think MLS teams have a bit of a higher chance as one of those teams should probably win the tournament with just more teams being in it. But it's definitely, I think, objectively true that the bottom to middle side teams in Mexico are all probably better quality levels still than MLS sides, even though it has the quality in the league has been improving. I would say only the top end, really handful of teams have kind of cemented themselves and gotten to the level of the top Mexican teams, but anything below that, I'd say MX still has a clear advantage. So it's going to be interesting once again. Obviously, Inter Miami, your winners last season in this tournament, and Mexican teams once again they have to travel to America and some of these Canadian teams in MLS to play all these games. There's going to be no games in Mexico once again, but I think they've gotten a little bit more used to it or have a better feel for it after doing the same in last season's edition. So it's an interesting dynamic. Most Mexican teams and the federation honestly don't even want to be playing in this tournament. They think it's kind of a waste and schedule congestion and all that, and kind of a cash grab for MLS for the most part, especially trying to market Messi, who may not even be playing in the entire tournament, and let alone the first couple group games. So that's another interesting angle we'll tackle. And yeah, there's going to be 45 teams once again. We're going to have 3 rounds of group stages with 15 matches each. And there's 15 groups of 3 teams. They had to figure out how to get this done with all these teams playing. So there's 15 groups of 3. The top 2 in each group advance. So you're only going to play 2 teams in your group once each. And there's not really, in that case, many teams dropping out. So that'll advance to the round of 32 after that group stage, where there's only going to be 2 teams waiting who don't have to play in the group stage. That's going to be Club America in Mexico and then the Columbus Crew in MLS, both being the respective champions of their league. Club America actually doing the double, winning both championships for each portion of the season last season. So both of them get buys. They don't have to play in the group stage, but the rest of these teams have to battle it out in the group stage. And then we'll get to the round of 32, as you see on the screen here, starting on August 9th. And then the final will be on the 25th of August. So it's a month-long tournament. It's going to be a lot of games. Going to be another good test to see the levels of both the sides in these leagues. And yeah, we're going to go ahead and get into the rationale for how these groups were picked. So as you can see in the graphic here, these teams were basically put into 3 different tiers, and the way they went about this was basically just taking all of the teams' last 34, I think, games from their previous seasons, and then just accumulating their points and goal difference and all that. So it's a pretty straightforward process. The thing is just that with the Mexican schedule, since it's split into 2 portions, each half has a regular season and then a playoff after it. So I'm pretty sure for the Mexican side of things, in terms of the points, it was just from the regular season. They combined both regular seasons and then added that up. So I think it's a pretty fair system. And, each group now, since it's groups of 3, each group will have a team from each of these tiers. So that's how they went about it. But the thing is, this is from last season, and MLS obviously has the most irregular schedule compared to everyone else, because the Mexican schedules, even though it's split into 2 halves, it still stretches across the same kind of timeline as a European soccer schedule. So MLS has already played basically 2/3 of its season of this season, and they're taking into account only last season. Meanwhile, Mexico is basically just starting their new season. So in terms of the MLS side of things, when it comes to this tier structure, it's not the most completely fair, assessment, because where these teams were at the end of last season, based on these point totals, might be completely different from where they are right now. Like, such as Orlando City, they're 4th or whatever it is on this graphic based on last season's points, and right now they're like basically, I think they're like seventh in the East, but they were not looking good for a while, and they definitely are not one of the top teams right now as it stands in MLS. So that will lead to some, what could have been more fair groups. I think just looking at the groups, we'll get to those and make our predictions. But once you'll see, like, since it's taking into account last season, a lot of things have changed for these MLS teams specifically, and where they stand, how they've changed and quality wise, and there's going to be some pretty stacked groups just based on this tier structure, and then some pretty kind of weak groups overall, and then some kind of more fair groups, and that's just how it goes. But they had to figure this out, I guess, ahead of time, and that's just how it goes. So, but yeah, was just the rationale for that, and we're gonna get into our predictions for the group stage. So we're gonna get started here, going one by one with these groups, and I just want to preface this by explaining that there are no ties in this group stage. If there is a tie, each team will get 1 point, but then it goes immediately to a penalty shootout, and the winning team gets an added point, so that there are no technical ties. There has to be a way to distinguish these teams in the final group standings. So obviously for a win, you get 3 points as well. And then also, as you see on the screen here, for each of these groups from left to right, that's actually the way these teams are in the tiers. So Orlando, Tigres, Philly, they're in tier 1. And then Atletico San Luis, Puebla, Charlotte, they're all in tier 2, and so on. And the thing is that all the tier 1 teams in MLS, the MLS teams that are tier 1 get to host both of their group games. So that's a big advantage. And when it comes to the Mexican teams that are in tier 1, obviously none of the games are being played in Mexico. So we'll get to those little kind of caveats and situations for each group when we get to that group. But yeah, I just wanted to preface it by explaining those. So we'll start with group 1 here, East 1. And this was actually the order of the tiers, the way I have them ordered in the final group. I have Cincy, New York City, and then Queretaro dropping out. Cincy, it's hard not to, I don't want to undersell or underplay how dire their defensive situation is right now with the players they have out. But I think just the two other teams in this group, I think they can really just claw their way out of this group, and they won't have too many problems. I think Lucho Acosta is gonna be back. He's had a foot injury, but he's gotten some rest, and he's gonna be playing this All-Star game. Probably gonna be taking it easy. Obviously, they were saving him for this tournament, and yeah, I just think they have the attack to kind of deal with what these other two teams bring. I mean, New York City has been a really good story this season, but their road form has just been really woeful. They've been blanked like way too many times by these even worse teams in MLS as well. They're a completely different team on the road. And Queretaro is honestly one of the worst Mexican teams, in my opinion. They've started the season 0 wins, 0 draws, 4 losses. And they've just consistently been one of the bottom tier Mexican sides. They really don't have too much attacking flair. I think they're going to be playing for some draws here, and I think they'll be completely content to go to penalties and take their chances. But, I could see them maybe doing that against New York City, but New York City will have the home field there. And, it's really anyone's guess who wins penalties when it goes to that. But I'm just going to give New York the slight edge in that matchup when they play. But I think Cincy just has too much on the attacking end to not advance out of this group at the very least. But I think they win it with 2 wins, whether that be on penalties or not. But yeah, these other two teams just really don't offer much. But this is a reason why Cincy, I think, won't get far in the bracket. So we're moving on to East 2 here, and I have the same order as the tiers were once again. Orlando City first, San Luis second, Montreal third. The opening game in this group is Orlando versus Montreal. Both games in MLS play have been draws, but Orlando City, I would say, is just in the much better form. Montreal actually just lost to a really woeful Toronto side in their own derby. And yeah, Orlando City gets to host both their group games. They've really been thriving recently, picking up in the standings, getting back to the system they like under Pareja, and getting pieces back from the European tournaments as well. So I think they're just in really hot form. And then, so yeah, I think they can beat Montreal with ease. And then that second game would be San Luis versus Montreal. San Luis is going to be on a little bit more rest there, obviously, getting that extra little time off. And I think they give Montreal a game. Montreal's, MLS numbers in terms of their expected goals allowed are some of the worst. Both these teams honestly have pretty back and forth games usually, from what I've followed in Liga MX. And I just think San Luis can take this and to at least a draw and maybe win on pens, and then that leaves Montreal maybe out already after their first two games, and then that leaves San Luis versus Orlando City as the last game, where that's a pretty long travel honestly for San Luis between those two areas. And yeah, I mean I can see them giving Orlando a competitive game as well, but just based on what I expect in terms, I think Orlando beats Montreal, so that leaves them with 0 points. And then if San Luis already beats Montreal again, even on pens, they have more points, and Montreal has no more games left. So I think the travel will affect San Luis when it comes to after that game and then going to Orlando. And Orlando, with the form they're in, I just like them to just handle business and just barely squeak out San Luis in terms of first and second, but I just don't see Montreal doing much in this group. East 3, and I have Tigres topping this group. The caveat here is that Tigres is in Tier 1, but they can't host games. So Miami against Tigres is not going to be at Chase Stadium where Miami plays. Miami's going to play Puebla first at Chase Stadium, but the Miami versus Tigres game is going to be at NRG Stadium where the Houston Texans play. So no two home games for Miami, so it's kind of going to be a bit of a neutral site there in terms of that Tigres Miami game. But Miami plays Puebla first. I think even without Messi, they can get the job done. Puebla only won one of their 17 total Clausura regular season games, and they haven't looked too good to start this Apertura right now. In the handful of games they played, they just give up way too many goals. Miami's cleaned it up enough defensively. I think they can squeak by and just start this off with a win. And then the next game in this group is going to be Tigres taking on Puebla. So you have a little bit more rested Tigres against a weakened Puebla, and Tigres should obviously be the favorites in that game. And I see Tigres taking that one as well. And then that leaves this final battle between the clear top two teams in this group. And if that's how it plays out, how I see it, then both these teams have already advanced, and then it's just who's 1 versus 2. There might be some rest involved, and they're not going to risk Messi because he's already been confirmed out for this first game. He's probably not even going to play regardless in the second game, and they're just praying they could get by to the knockout rounds. So taking all that into account, I just think that last game kind of being just a game they have to play, but they're both through. I just kind of favor Tigres in that one. I just think they have a little bit more quality attacking wise, and it just depends, how serious they go in terms of the lineups. But I think Tigres should definitely be the favorites in that one as well, and they probably edge this group and get the number 1 spot. So in East 4, I think this is a really interesting group. We have Cruz Azul, Charlotte, and Philly. That's the way I have it. I have Cruz Azul in first. I think this should be a clear-cut first place for them. This team has completely revived under Anselmi in the Mexican League. In the recent Clausura, they went second in the regular season, and then they lost in the final to Club America in a close game. But they were the second best defensive team, giving up only 14 goals in 17 games in that regular season portion. And they've started this next Apertura off really hot. 3 wins, 1 draw, 9-1 goal difference, and they added Giacomakis from Atlanta United, only just boosting their attacking core. And they're just looking really well drilled. They're a really strong defensive team, as I mentioned, and they get to play Charlotte and Philly. Charlotte, a very defensive-minded team as well, so that could be a really tight match. And it's just about who can deliver more. Cruz Azul is obviously going to have to travel for both of these games, but I just see them dispatching both these teams, especially the Union, who have been really woeful. I know they picked up back-to-back wins now, but just looking at this entire season as a whole, they're not what they have been recently, and they're definitely the weakest team in this group. Charlotte gets to go to Philly for the first game in this group. They already beat Philly 2-0 at Subaru Park, and I think Charlotte gets the job done, maybe takes it to pens and gets the job done. And then you have Cruz Azul having to go to Charlotte and then a closeout against Philly. I just think Cruz Azul has too much for the Union 100%. The Charlotte game could be tight because both these teams love to play defensively, but I think Charlotte's attack is just really the only question mark for me, and that's kind of going to be their weak link. But I still expect them to progress in this group. I just think Cruz Azul is a clear-cut favorite, and they're really going to show their quality, especially against a team as poorly defensively as the Union have been. So for the East 5 group, we have honestly 3 abysmal teams, but this is what the tiers were from last season. Nashville was definitely much better last season. Mazatlan was the tier 3 group. They've been pretty poor in recent seasons. One of the worst teams, honestly, but they've improved just enough where I think they get second in this group. Nashville getting their new coach now, Callahan, in the mix to start Leagues Cup. He hasn't coached a game before this for them, so that's an interesting element to this. But New England, actually the tier 1 team in this group, they get to host both home games, but honestly, like it just really doesn't matter for them. They're so poor. They're still going to be missing players, and Caleb Porter said that players like Hill and the rest of the guys have been out recently, Vrioni, that they're definitely not making a return for the first game against Mazatlan, their first game, and they may just miss out on the group stage altogether. And they're just honestly one of the worst front of end teams. Give up way too many goals without the players like Hill and Vrioni. I don't know where the goals are coming from, and that's why I just give Mazatlan the edge. I think Nashville is lucky to have a group as poor as this. They have obviously looked terrible defensively, and they're not going to be with Zimmerman still. But it's hard to imagine them not coming out of a group this poor. Mazatlan has to go play New England first. I think they could honestly pull off a result there, or at least a tie. And I don't see New England beating either of these teams personally. Nashville has the core and just enough. I think Mukhtar maybe steps up a little bit here, and the rest of the attackers, as long as people stay healthy. Sam Surge has been out for a couple games, but he's been kind of on the questionable list. And maybe if he gets back, Schaffelberg is going to be a key player, I think, for them. And honestly, if there were any other teams, Nashville probably shouldn't be progressing, but this was a really lucky break for them, in my opinion. So in East 6, we have Pachuca, Red Bulls, and Toronto in that order of the tiers, and I have them in the same order. I'm going to make a betting video for the first round of games and such, and maybe like future bets, like group winners and stuff. And the betting odds do not favor Pachuca at all, and I don't see how. I mean, I don't know if I just have this wrong, but listen, Pachuca has just won the CONCACAF Champions Cup. I mean, they beat the Crew in the final. Food poisoning and all aside, they still won the damn thing. They beat Club America on the way there. They haven't been the most successful side in terms of the most recent like Liga MX playoffs specifically, but when it comes to these intercontinental tournaments like Champions Cup and all this, they're just built for this type of tournament football, and they haven't been full strength for most of these couple, or just to start this Liga MX season. Rondon's been basically on rest after the Copa America run he had, and they've just been kind of mixing in and plugging in lineups to start the season. So they don't look well in terms of the standings right now after a handful of games in the Mexican League, but they are going to be well rested here. They don't have to play the first match in this group because it's going to be between Red Bulls and Toronto. And I think Toronto will be lucky to get a point out of this group. I mean, Red Bulls have had no problem destroying Toronto so far this season. Red Bulls get to host both home games, and that's going to be the first game. I think they easily get the 3 points there, even without Forsberg. And then we have Pachuca. Then in the second group game, they play at the Red Bulls. And I think if Forsberg was playing and if Tolkien was playing, this would be a little bit of a different discussion. But if Pachuca does go full strength like I expect them to, I think their attack is just can definitely overpower this Red Bulls team and get the job done. And then the final game would be Pachuca versus Toronto, where I see no problems for Pachuca, taking care of business there. Toronto has just been one of those other really, really poor teams. They started strong, but they've had a really rough turnaround. I know they just won the derby against Montreal, but that I really don't care. Pachuca is just built for these moments, in my opinion, and they should really have no trouble topping this group. The only thing would be really whether maybe their game against New York goes to a penalty shootout, and then the winner of that penalty, maybe in the situation I'm seeing, they advance or they get in that first place spot. But in general, these top two teams should be the top two, regardless of the order. Here in E7, I think this is one of the biggest toss-ups. You could honestly have this any way, in my opinion. But I'm going to go with Atlanta in first, DC in second, and then Santos in third. Santos has just become one of the least good-looking teams, honestly, in the Mexican League. They really don't have too many star players. They have a lot of younger players. They've really fallen off the standings recently. And Preciado, one of their best striker player, got banned for doping, and so he obviously won't be featuring. And they just really, to me, don't offer much. I mean, the only reason I could see them coming out of this group in general would be because these other two teams are also just so wide open. They just play such back and forth games. They really leave themselves exposed. And so you can make a case for any of these teams to be in any of these positions in the group. But Atlanta opens up playing DC. Both of these teams have beaten each other on the road in their 2 MLS games. And I just think Atlanta is a little bit more compact. DC, if they can get Benteke going, can cause problems. But I think DC's defensive issues are just a little bit worse than Atlanta's. And that might be the difference. And then I just think DC, they get to play that home match after that against Santos, and they can maybe pull off a win there. But I just think DC's attack will maybe find a way against Santos, because all these teams are such poor teams when it comes to their back lines and just keeping teams out. So it could really go any way. I just think Atlanta has a little bit more to offer when it comes to their structure, and that first game might just give them, playing that first game, getting the break while DC and Santos play that second game, and then hosting again against Santos. That plays a part in it. The schedule, getting to play at home both games, that can simply be the difference sometimes, and just give them that little boost they need. Even though none of these teams have looked good whatsoever, but it's just another group where one of these teams or two of these teams are going to have to come out, and I think Atlanta just is probably the best team in this group. Finally, we get to move on to the West portion of these groups. We start with West 1, and once again, I have this in the same order as the tiers are. This is actually spot on for me in terms of how it's progressed from how they ordered it last season to what the actual situation is now. Monterrey has been one of the top teams in MX for some time now. They obviously have had a lot of criticism, and the coach as well, for not actually winning anything when it comes to the Mexican playoffs and Champions Cup recently. But I think they're the clear best team in this group. They obviously added earlier, at the beginning of the MLS season, they added Brandon Vasquez to that front attacking core with Bertarame. They have players like Canales, Cortizo. They have a really strong midfield. And Pumas as well. They added Funes Mori, who can be a bit on and off, but I think he's a serviceable striker for them. They still have Huerta, and listen, Austin FC. I can't say enough how bad they are. They obviously added Bukhari in the window and a defender as well from Ukraine that is slipping my mind the name of, but still, Austin will be hosting both of these home games just because they're the only MLS team in this group. But the thing is that when Monterrey and Pumas play each other, they're also going to be playing at Austin. So none of these Mexican teams have to travel between their games. And the other thing is that some of the Austin supporter groups are actually boycotting this tournament as a whole, and so that'll lead to less fans and a much less advantage in terms of home environment for Austin. They're boycotting it because of the MLS's decision to pull most of the MLS teams out of the U.S. Open Cup, because they were citing like schedule congestion and all that, and they instead obviously wanted to focus on having all these teams in Leagues Cup. So the supporters group that is one of the only few supporters group boycotting this tournament, and Austin is already bad as it is, and that's just going to lead to a less of an advantage, and they're obviously not as good as either of these two teams anyway. So I don't see a world where Austin progresses out of this group, and these two Mexican teams should make it out, and I just see Monterrey as just being a little bit better than Pumas just overall. They've gotten, obviously they play each other a lot and are used to each other, and I just think Monterrey has the quality to get first in this group. We move on to West 2 with two LA teams and Chivas USA, if you remember. They're going to have a strong contingent there as they play both these games. One of these games, actually, the one between Chivas and San Jose, is going to be at Levi's Stadium. So no team in this group is hosting two games. The Earthquakes will host Galaxy, and then the Galaxy will host Chivas. And then that Levi's game is kind of a 50-50, kind of neutral game. But rocking the new Archive Galaxy shirt, this is a beautiful kit, and I just had to get it, and it's making its first appearance on the show here, but I had to mention that since we're discussing the Galaxy. And yeah, they're on fire right now. They haven't lost at home the entire season. They're looking really good offensively. Everyone's clicking. Painter's kind of getting back into the fold of things, with Peck was kind of taking over recently in terms of the goal scoring production, but everything's really clicking right now. The only thing is whether Jovic goes, because he's missed the past 3 or 4 MLS games with I think a hamstring injury. But even without him, he's kind of really not the end all be all. They can still definitely cause problems in this group. The Earthquakes are easily the worst team in MLS. They've also just dried up offensively recently, and that's kind of only been their saving grace because their defense is easily the worst. And Chivas haven't been the most convincing Mexican team recently, but they're still a huge club, as we know. And they signed Chicharito way past his prime. He's kind of leading the line. Obviously not prolific anymore, but Cade Cowell's really been waking up to start this Mexican season after a really poor introduction in the Clausura last season. So I think Galaxy should easily top this group. Honestly, I think they just have way too much offensively for either of these teams. Chivas do like to keep it tighter, but I'm really not scared of their attack. And then in that, the decider is really going to be the Chivas versus Earthquakes, where obviously it's going to be that neutral site, and I just see Chivas just having enough, maybe in penalties, but the Earthquakes just really aren't convincing, and there's no reason that we should expect them to turn things around just for this 2-game kind of tournament that I think, for them it will end in 2 games. West 3 is really another toss-up in my opinion. I see Juarez topping this group just because of how poor these other 2 MLS teams are. Juarez isn't a great team, but they're kind of a mid-table team usually in Mexico, and I think just they have enough what it takes. The opening game in this is St. Louis versus Dallas. Dallas has kind of had St. Louis's number this season at least, but I do see St. Louis winning that game, honestly, or at least if it goes to shootouts, just favoring them. They got, obviously, the couple key signings. Tykert featured in that derby against Kansas City. But the thing is, though, the St. Louis supporters, some of them are also the ones boycotting this tournament. So that could obviously be a disadvantage for them as they host these 2 home matches, and it won't be as good of an environment. But I still think they have enough what it takes to get through Dallas, who is going to be without Ferreira. Their defense is also shaky, and they've been traveling a little bit too much recently. And then that leaves the second match in this with Juarez a little bit more rested. They go to Dallas. And yeah, I think Juarez can find a way there, and that leaves that final match against St. Louis, where regardless of the fact that St. Louis is going to have that little extra rest and Juarez has to travel, St. Louis is just so poor defensively. I still see them getting out of this group with just that 1 win against Dallas. But yeah, I think both of these the MLS teams in this group are really, really shaky, and you could have either in second or third. But I think that home advantage, regardless of the fact that the crowd won't be as electric as St. Louis is really used to, I think St. Louis, that will just give them enough to squeak by in this group. In West 4, we have Toluca, the Fire, and Kansas City. I'm pretty sure the Fire and KC were in the same group last year. And yeah, both these MLS sides are really poor, really inconsistent. Toluca has been one of the best attacking sides, at the very least, in the past couple seasons, and they just added Paulinho and Alexis Vega. Paulinho coming from Sporting CP, who just won the Portuguese league, kind of an attacking midfielder type of player, and that's a big boost. And yeah, they're also in that upper kind of tier of the Mexican sides, just in that upper half at least. And they should have enough what it takes here. The Fire go to Kansas City for that opening game. I think I'm a little biased here as a Fire fan, but I think, Kansas City hasn't been impressive. They've had a couple better results recently, but I'm pretty sure the Fire beat them last year as well, and in Kansas City. And I think that, could happen here again, or it could go depends. And then the second game would be the Fire against Toluca in SeatGeek Stadium, actually, so not at Soldier Field where the Fire mainly play. And, I just think in both these matches for Toluca, they just have too much offensive firepower. And Kansas City especially has been a really, really bad defensive team, one of the worst teams in the West. And yeah, neither of these teams offer too much threat to Toluca, in my opinion. And personally, I guess I'm just being a little biased here, but I think the Fire, I think that game itself between the Fire and KC is a 50-50, and I'm just going to lean the Fire. I think their attack has been a little bit more fluid, and just they just have the better attacking players. For West 4, this is kind of a high-powered group, at least for the MLS side of things. We got Rapids, Timbers, and Leon. That's going to be my order for this group. And yeah, the Timbers have been absolutely electric offensively. They just suffered a loss to the Galaxy on the road, but they put up 2 goals in that match. They've no shortage of attacking ideas. That front four has really been working recently. It's really just their defense that's been the issue. But the thing is, they get to host both their group games, so at home specifically, they've been on fire, and that gives them a clear edge. And the Rapids, though, they will be missing Mihailovic with that Olympic team, so that's their only real loss here. But besides that, I just think they have the best defense out of these 2 MLS teams. And Leon's kind of fallen off a little. They don't have their kind of top-end players that they used to have in the previous seasons. So, I do see them not making it out of this group, honestly. The Rapids will host that final game in the group against Leon to close things out, and I think that puts them in the 1 spot. I think that game between the Rapids and Timbers will be really close, and I just lean the Rapids to maybe get a tie and bring things to penalties, and we'll see what happens if that were the case. But I just think the Rapids, regardless of missing Mihailovic, they still have a really high-powered offense, really young attack, and they can definitely hold things down against another high-powered offense in the Timbers, and it really just comes down to, a couple key moments. But I do trust the Rapids with their structure, with their defensive pieces to kind of just. I do see both MLS teams making it out, but I'm gonna go with the Rapids to just kind of edge out for that first spot. In West 6, I have the Sounders topping the group. They're gonna host both their games. I think they've just been looking so good at home. I know they just suffered that loss to LAFC, which was a pretty rare loss at home, but they've been really flying recently. They've gotten healthy. They've been at home for a while now. They get to host both games again, like I said, and I just think they should have no trouble. They already played Minnesota at home. That was a pretty simple win, even when missing a couple pieces. Minnesota's really been falling off. They've had, I think, now a 10-game winless run after a really good start, even with a couple pieces coming back on the offensive end. I just don't see them hanging around. Their defensive numbers are just really poor. Necaxa is kind of a mid-table group, so I think the Sounders should have no trouble being first. It just really comes down to that game at Minnesota between the 2 and 3 that I have right here. And I'm gonna just slightly favor Necaxa there. Minnesota could definitely win that game, but I think their kind of issues with the back line, they kind of tend to get in higher scoring games, and I think that might hurt them, and it could come down to penalties. And I'm just going to go with the kind of the resolve of the Mexican side here. West 7 includes LAFC, Vancouver, and Tijuana. And yeah, this should be pretty straightforward, at least from LAFC's perspective. They host both games. They've been absolutely ridiculously good at home, just in general. They just got another win at the Sounders, like I mentioned the past segment, and Bowanga's clicking, Bogusz is clicking. They're going to get a couple players back with Tillman and Oliveira, after maybe, possibly, actually, depending on their injury statuses, but that would be a big boost. Regardless of that, they're just a really strong team defensively. They've been impressive, and that's given them one of the top spots in the West so far. They've just been really well balanced overall. And they get to host Tijuana first, who I really don't think offers too many problems. They've been kind of mid-table to lower table side in the Mexican League recently, and I just think that home advantage for LAFC is way too much. If this were anywhere else, maybe it could be a tighter game, but I think that's an opening win for them. And then they play Vancouver right after that at home again. And honestly, LAFC has just completely owned Vancouver recently in the playoffs the past year, and then also already this season they thrashed them as well at home. So I think it's also kind of a mental block thing. Vancouver, I am high on them, and I've been high on them, but and the attack has been clicking recently. They've really turned things around, but in terms of the game against LAFC, I think there's just a clear advantage there for LAFC to turn the stylistically, and then that just sets up that final game between the Whitecaps and Tijuana, and the Whitecaps will host that. And I don't, honestly, I could see either team progressing out of that. It's just really what kind of Whitecaps team shows up, because it's really about in those big moments who can come up with the goals, and we've seen them kind of falter at times, obviously, especially in the playoffs recently, like I just alluded to. But they are in form though, so I will lean them with Brian Wright, Gauld, Pico. They're attacking wise, they have been informed. Their defense has been a little shaky, but usually it's pretty respectable and locks things down for the most part. So Tijuana is just not one of those more threatening teams in my opinion. And yeah, I see the Whitecaps just getting out of this group just because of that one home game they get to have. So closing out the groups with West 8, and listen, I've RSL in second, but I wouldn't be surprised if they completely dropped out of this group. I know it's crazy to say, but Dynamo get to host both their games in this one. They start playing with Atlas, and their home advantage can't be overstated enough. Just in general, the past seasons in the playoffs, in Open Cup, which they won last season, they've just been such a solid home team, and they've only gotten better. They've been solid. They added Ponce, who featured for 45 minutes in that Vancouver game. Their midfield is honestly one of the best in MLS, and they're just in really good form. They get to start with Atlas, who I think they'll beat. Atlas hasn't been very convincing since they won that title a couple of years ago. And then it's RSL taking on Atlas, where Chicho Arango is facing. That's one of the games he's banned for. That's the last game he's banned for as part of his 4-game suspension. So RSL does get to host that one, but they won't be full strength in that sense. And their defense certainly hasn't been up to standards. Justin Glad featured for barely any amount of time in the past game, and if he can't really go for the full game, then that's a big problem for them. And I would not be surprised if Atlas, at least took this to pens, and anything can happen, right? And then, Chicharito does return for that Dynamo game to close it out, but you could be already facing, being already last in that group. The Dynamo are well rested after having that little break from the first game of the group, and then you have to go to the Dynamo and get a result where RSL already played Dynamo this season, and Dynamo really kept it close. It was a 4-3 result at RSL, so Dynamo can definitely make it tough on them for a high-powered team such as RSL, but it's really not set up for RSL to do too much. I mean, I still lean them, and I'm going to take them second in this group. It's just dependent on that Atlas match, because if they don't get a result in the Atlas match and then have to travel to the Dynamo, I mean, that could be a really, really tight game, and you don't want to be desperate going into that game. So, but I'm going to favor them. I still think their offense has a lot of potential, a lot of youth, and they've been looking really vibrant, one of the top teams in the West. It's just missing Chicho for that first game against Atlas. It's going to be just interesting to see how they manage that. And if they can get past that road bump, then they should definitely, just at least make it out of this group. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video. And I didn't want to do a prediction for the bracket because, if my group stage picks aren't completely 100% accurate, then that bracket's not going to go the way we expect. So once the group stage ends, I'll make another video predicting the bracket. But honestly, my winner, as it looks, I would say the Crew are definitely the favorite for me. Might have a bit of a tough path, but I think honestly both of them or Club America deserve to be the teams on the bye for a reason, and they should get pretty far in this tournament. But thank you once again for watching, and make sure to follow the Twitter at MLS Digest. And just to let you know, I'll be posting a video in the coming day or two, another one previewing specifically the first round of Leagues Cup, and posting some bets for that, and also maybe some future bets in terms of who I really like in terms of the group winners. So if you're interested in that content and that type of the part of this channel, then make sure to look out for that video, and I'll be going over those first rounds of matches, and then continuously after that I'll be previewing each set of group stage matches, and then so on and so forth. So look out for more content as Leagues Cup goes along and we get into the swing of things for the next month. It's going to be a lot of games, a lot of entertaining moments, I'm sure, and hopefully we just get some high quality soccer in number one. So thanks for watching once again, guys. Look out for the new video, and I'll see you in that one as we preview Leagues Cup Group Stage Match Day 1.